Welcome to the Scholar's Chair. Tonight, a discussion about family. Family life as written by Dr. Ismail Faruqi in his book entitled El Tawheed, Its Implication for Thought and Life. Our book review will start with Chapter 9, entitled The Principle of the Family. Inspired by their doctrines of the origin of society, the communists deliberately planned to replace the family with communes. The communists pictured the ideal conditions of human life as those where people live in dormitories, eat in mess halls, and regard their offspring as children of the state. Although many communes were created, the communists soon realized that the collective method of personal organization is bound to fail, and the traditional family form continued to function. The state's assumption of so many of the duties usually undertaken by the parents towards their children out of love and concern for them has weakened the family bond. Today, there is hardly a foundation which members of the family may build their relationship except the memory of dependency and company in childhood. In Western Europe and North America, movement into the great urban concentrations in search of employment made everybody anonymous. Mixing of the sexes, loose morality, economic independence of women, a strong brand of individualism, and the traditional absolutization of nature within have all contributed towards the erosion of the family bond. The license and sexual promiscuity of the second half of this century express the sad state of affairs to which the institution of the family has sunk. Currently, more than half of all children born in the cities are illegitimate. The family has become animal, in the sense of lasting only so long as the children are physically helpless and need the constant attention of their parents. Once they reach adulthood, the material need disappears and the family bond disintegrates. Nay, worse, the preoccupation of parents with work outside the home, their psychic exhaustion, and the pressure for them to seek emotional satisfaction outside the home has weakened the family bond, even when children are still at a tender age. The family, as we have known, practically on its deathbed. Anthropologists have also contributed to the downfall of the family institution by teaching that other forms of human association are possible and have been successful among animals and primitives. Their constant reference to the animal world when considering the human condition have brainwashed people that differences from the animal are unnatural. And their deluge of perspective theories that deviate forms of human association, where once the rule, have contributed towards the family's dislodgement from its traditional place of honor and necessity. Throughout the communist world and the West, the institution of the family has undergone radical change. Today, it stands truly associated with the general decay of society. It is affecting and being affected by the decline of morals, of social cohesion, of the continuity of traditions through the generations. Regardless of which is cause and which effect, civilization and the family seems to be destined for rising together or falling together. The Muslim world and the rest of the third world, insofar as they preserve their identity from the onslaught of communism and Western ideologies, are the only societies left where the family still keeps its place of honor. The Islamic institution stands the better chance to survive because it is buttressed by Islamic law and determined by its close relation to El Tawhid, the essence of Islamic religious experience. Fulfillment of the purpose of God for mankind requires that humans intermarry and procreate, as well as live together and thus provide theater of relationships wherein the moral part of the divine will may be fulfilled by human decision and action. This theater can consist of four levels, namely the self, the family, the tribe, nation or race, and universal ummah. The need for the first level is self-evident. Any fulfillment of any morality requires the subject's entry into an ethical relationship with his own self. To recognize that self, to preserve and promote it, and to subject it to determination by moral values are conditions without which creation itself would flounder. The third level is the tribe, nation, or race is not necessary. It is the same nature as the Ummah, in that it establishes relations with other humans with whom you or one has no biological relation, or a relation so distant that it is not the subject of immediate feeling, but of the imagination. From this perspective, the tribe, nation, or race level is restrictive only, since it adds nothing to the relationship the individual can have with the Ummah. The Ummah founds the relations of religion and ideology and extends membership to all subscribers, regardless of birth or social incidences such as language, history, or color. The Ummah relationship is more human and preserves the dignity of the person, whereas the tribe, nation, or race relationship violates the dignity by passing it to an exclusivism of incidence of birth. That is why Islam abolished the tribe, nation, race as base of relation and substituted for it the universal Ummah. Tribalism prevailed in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance and backwardness, and its child, nationalism and racism, have been the dominating criterion in the Roman and Persian empires, which preceded Islam. They were responsible for such evil in the affairs of men that they had to be uprooted. That leaves the family alone as ultimate social unit, flanked by the individual on one side and the universal Ummah on the other. Its importance in the cosmic order has been emphasized in the Quran. It is the signs of Allah that He has created of yourselves spouses of one another, love and mercy. Islam does not condemn sex. It regards it as innocent, necessary, and good, and is not only permits, but recommends that men and women seek their fulfillment in it. However, it does not recognize it alone as fulfilling the purpose of marriage. The marriage, which is built purely on sex, the love syndrome of romanticism, it declares imperfect and incomplete. Marriage generates a wide complex of human relations, which are the material of great part of the moral imperative. The duties of procreating, of loving, supporting, counseling, guiding, educating, helping, befriending fall upon the person first towards the members of his family. In the category of kinship, figures very prominently in the social commands of God in the Quran. In short, one can say that Islam regards the family as the indispensable for the fulfillment of the divine purpose. There can be no El Tawhid without such fulfillment. For to recognize Allah as the one and only God means to recognize him as he whose will and commandments are the ought, the good, and the purpose for man. To adhere to El Tawhid is to experience the command of God as obligatory, and to do so means to seek to realize the real extent materials which actualize the values implicit in such commands. These are all logically linked up to and inseparable from one another. It is not possible to fulfill the one without fulfilling the others. God has indeed commanded not only the necessity or actualization of these values, but directed the method and specified the materials for doing so. These are the family and the relations to which it gives rise. The necessity of both can be established rationally. God's specification of them is a confirmation of their rational necessity. There can therefore be no al-Tawhid without the family. Equality. There can be no doubt that Allah has made men and women equal in their religious, ethical, and civil rights, duties, and responsibilities. There are, however, a very few exceptions, and these pertain to the functions as fathers and mothers. On the religious level, Allah establishes their equality in the verse 1697. It reads, "Whoever works righteousness, man or woman, and has faith, verily to him, her, will we give a new life, a life that is good and pure, and we will bestow on such their reward according to the best of their actions." Islam requires men and women as created for differing and mutually complementary functions, the functions of motherhood, of home care and children upbringing, and those of fatherhood, home protection, livelihood earning, and overall responsibility calls for different physical, psychic, and emotional constitutions in men and women. Islam blesses the differentiation as necessary for self-fulfillment of both sexes. The Quranic verse reads, "And the Lord has accepted of them and answered them. Never will I suffer to be lost the work of any of you, be he male or female. Ye are members one of another." Role differentiation is a far cry from discrimination or segregation. Both roles are equally subject to the religious and ethical norms. Both require all the intelligence, talent, energy, and self-exertion that the subjects can muster. Equally, the role differentiation says nothing about the areas of activities where men's and women overlap, where about those other areas where no overlapping is in question. Where natural aptitude makes it desirable or necessity makes it expedient, men's and women's activities may cross into each other's realm without prejudice to the main role differentiation established by God in nature. Otherwise, the Quran would not have granted to women the full civil rights it did, and which nobody questions. The Holy Quran states, and in no wise covet those things in which Allah has bestowed his gifts more freely on some of you than on others. To men is allotted what they earn, and to women what they earn. But ask Allah for his bounty, for Allah has full knowledge of all things. The Holy Quran has provided equality for men and women. There can be no doubt that Allah, God, did not intend the Muslim woman to insulate herself from society behind a veil or within the walls of a harem. The evidence in Islam's recognition of her right to participate in government and in public life or even in war. Obviously, such participation runs counter to insulation and veiling and the unthinkable with them. Evidence can be found in the Quran in Surah 60, verse 12, in Surah 9, verse 71 and 72, and Surah 3, verse 195. What Islam is most careful to avoid is that kind of exposure which leads to immorality and fornication. Here, there are two commandments, one general, addressed to both men and women, with equal emphasis, if not more for men, since the verse mentions them first. The second concerns women and is found in the same verses as a aforementioned, namely 24, 30, 31. True, the Quran did ask women to cover themselves, but it has expressly accepted those parts which custom would have exposed if women were to fulfill their career and destiny as prescribed by Islam. Deliberate exposure of feminine beauty and ornament does lead to temptation and is therefore prohibited except to minors and those adults who can have no sexual relations with the person in question, like your father, your brother, son, or uncle. Avoidance of temptation is a high ethical ideal. It has nothing to do with women's fulfillment of her Islamic duties in society. After all, women have been seen with uncovered faces, hands, and feet performing these Islamic functions uninterruptedly since the Prophet days and the holy sanctuary of Mecca itself. It is religiously and ethically imperative for all men and women to marry. High dowries, lack of housing, education, and employment should constitute no impediment to the marriage of either sex. These have become impediments in the West because the high premium the West puts on material achievement and the little concern Western people have for sexual virtue. The family unit being nuclear, it is necessary for the protective spouses to achieve economic independence before marriage. The Islamic family is the extended model which includes parents, grandparents, males, and their wives and offspring. Since women are entitled by Sharia to support by their husbands and those to whom they are dependent, Islam lays upon it the adult male to support the female. Most Muslim men and women have married young. They regarded the ability of the male spouse personally to achieve economic independence before marriage as irrelevant to the question of marriage. Unfortunately, Muslim youth are being westernized at an alarming rate, with the result that it has become very popular among them to seek personal independence and thus to postpone marriage until after achievement of that independence. This is sad and tragic development. Firstly, personal economic independence is by itself not evil, but the criterion of value beyond it may well be. Subscription to it as a necessary ideal is a presumption or a presupposition of a materialistic worldview, and adherence to it means a preference for a nuclear family over the extended. This, in turn, is the result of a exaggerated idealism and objectivism. Personal economic independence is more often than not the prerequisite of an undisciplined life. Secondly, postponement of marriage exposes both sexes to temptation. Marriage is a shield for virtue. Thirdly, the extended family. Early marriage does not make impossible demands upon spouses. It is possible for both of them to attend school or work, since there would always be loving relatives at home to turn the household and bring up children. Islam, then, would recommend to all Muslims to marry, to do so at a young age, and always to opt for living in an extended family. Allah has established the family in its extended form. Sharia has girded it with legislation specifying the dependents whose support is obligatory and the distribution of inheritance rights among them. Generally speaking, any relative is a dependent, however remote his kinship may be, provided he is in need and there is no capable adult male relative closer to him than the relative in question. Grandparents and grandchildren, uncles, and their offspring have priority. Agate relations are prior to cognate ones. In practice, Muslim family is composed of some 20 or so persons and living in a many-centered compound with one kitchen and one court where all members gather around the elders and guests are received. A Muslim family suffers from no generation gap as three generations live together. Thus, the socialization and the acculturation of the young is always complete, guarantee the transmission of tradition and culture with as little adulteration as possible. Here, the past is genuinely in touch with the present and the future. Another cultural advantage of the extended family is that it provides its members with an instant company whenever he desires it, and there is usually enough to choose from according to the prevailing mood. There is always somebody ready to play with, to joke with, to discuss with, to contemplate, to cry with, to hope with. This is a critical prerequisite for mental health. The extended family never lacks a child element, an adult element, a feminine element, a masculine element, an elderly element, wiser and more experienced than all the others. True, the extended family does impose upon its members discipline and mutual sacrifice. It may, at times, reduce their privacy, but life and this world do not permit us to carry on with our lives without discipline or sacrifice, as if the world was made for the individual. Certainly, it is good to have to discipline oneself, to sacrifice altruistically for the others. It is best for us that we learn how to discipline ourselves at home, at the hands of those who love us and whom we love, rather than at the hands of strangers. The career woman and the Islamic worker. So many Muslim women are copying the West in seeking a career through which to achieve economic independence, and personal freedom, that something must be said about Islam's position on the problem. As far as the overwhelming majority of Muslim women are concerned, there is little or no problem, but they are moving towards a full-time permanent career as housewives and mothers. It is needless to point out that such career demands as much or more training as any career outside the home. It is to wrap the noble career to describe it in terms of cooking and domestic chores. It involves taking care of humans, old and young, and that is the most difficult job on earth. It requires all the mature wisdom, intelligence, artistry, creativity, ready wit, and experience that a person can have. Training is certainly in order for all the time that the person can spend in it, whether in the discipline of homemaking or those of education, of literature and the arts, of history, psychology, and the culture. Although homemaking, childbearing, and child rearing are a universal career, it remains true that it does not exalt the energy of a woman throughout her life. Her membership is the extended family, whether on her side or on that of her husband, will provide her with assistance and therefore with more leisure. Her childbearing cares may not last beyond 2 or 3 decades at the longest. Her life may be 3 whole decades longer. Is it right that Muslim women waste their valuable time on family gossip when they could be helping the Ummah with their talents and energies? There are women equally who may not be fortunate enough to marry at all, or to have children, or even to live in an extended family. How does Islam perceive their life to be? Every woman, like every man, must carry the burden of serving Allah and benefiting the Ummah, according to his or her talents and best disposition. This task is doubly imperative today because of the decay and dormancy of the Ummah. Nobody can and should be spared. Our present circumstances demand that every woman be a career woman at least during some portion of her life. This could be during her student days and during her motherhood period if she lives in a large extended family, or after her motherhood period. Her first task is to undergo training as an Islamic worker, to undertake her mind to and nourish it with Islamic wisdom, to discipline and exercise herself in Islamic work, and to prepare herself for such work as Islamic movement may assign to her. She ought to have acquired the skills to awaken and teach other Muslims, and to mobilize them in service of the divine cause. And she ought to develop the skills required by social work in city and village. Though her social work, we should awaken the people to their Islamic duty and help them through teaching and good example to render the services of Muslims owed to Allah and the Ummah. Practically every field of activity is open to and needs her. There are whole professions which she can monopolize. But Muslim societies have far more need for Islamic women workers than any mobilization of women can bring in this generation. El-Tawhid asserts that this Ummah of yours is a single Ummah, whose Lord is God. Therefore worship and serve him. That the believers, and indeed a single brotherhood, whose members mutually love one another in God, who counsel one another to do justice and be patient, who cling together without exception to the rope of God and do not separate from one another, who beckons with one another, enjoining what is good and forbidding what is evil, who finally obey Allah, His Prophet, is the relevance of Al-Tawheed in society.